Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my house for over 15 years and never had any issues with neighbors or the homeowners association. That all changed when a new family moved in across the street about 6 months ago. The wife immediately introduced herself as the new homeowners association president and said she was going to whip our neighborhood into shape. I tried to be polite and introduce myself in return. I even mentioned that I wasn't part of the homeowners association since my property was grandfathered in when it was formed years ago. This woman, who I'll call Karen, looked at me like I was trash and said everyone is part of the homeowners association, whether they like it or not. That interaction should have been my first clue that this woman was going to be a nightmare. Karen wasted no time trying to throw her weight around as homeowners association president. She would patrol the neighborhood and leave angry notes if your lawn was half an inch too tall or if your trash cans were visible from the street. I continued to ignore her antics since I wasn't an homeowners association member. One Saturday afternoon, I was grilling in my backyard when I noticed Karen walking along my back fence. I walked over and politely asked if I could help her with something. She snapped, "I'm doing an inspection and your fence is not up to code. It needs to be replaced immediately." I informed her that she was mistaken and that as a non-homeowners association member, she had no authority to make any demands about my property. Karen's face turned red with anger. "You will do as I say or else," she shouted. I stood firm and said she needed to leave my private property immediately. She stormed off screaming that I hadn't heard the last of her. The next weekend, I was once again grilling in my backyard. I had just sat down to enjoy lunch when two police cars pulled up in front of my house. Two officers approached me and said they received a call that I was unlawfully holding a woman against her will in my backyard. I was shocked and immediately told them that was absolutely not true. Just then, Karen came marching across the street with a smug look on her face. She told the police I was an unreasonable and dangerous man who wouldn't let her conduct homeowners association business on my property. I showed the officers my property line and deed showing I was not an homeowners association member. I also mentioned I had security cameras if they needed proof that Karen was lying. The officers apologized for the confusion and turned to leave. One paused and said to Karen, "Ma'am, if we get another false report from you, you will be charged and fined for misuse of police resources." Karen stood there, opening and closing her mouth in shock, not sure how her plan backfired so badly. I wish I could say that was the end of my issues with Karen, but she was just getting warmed up. Over the next few weeks, I would frequently come home to find Karen parked in my driveway, even though I never gave her permission. She claimed she was doing homeowners association inspections of my property. No matter how many times I told her to get off my land, she would just ignore me. One evening, I came home late from work to find not one but two of Karen's cars parked in my driveway. This time I had had enough. I immediately called a tow truck company I had recently looked up just in case Karen pulled this stunt again. Within 20 minutes, the tow truck arrived. The driver confirmed that I owned the property and that the vehicles were improperly parked on private property. He quickly loaded up both of Karen's cars. Not long after, I heard angry yelling and saw Karen marching toward my front door. She pounded loudly and was screaming at me to give her cars back immediately. I calmly said through the door that I had simply exercised my legal rights to have unauthorized vehicles towed off my property. Karen continued screaming threats, saying I better return her cars or else. I told her to contact the tow company if she wanted to retrieve her vehicles. I also mentioned I had cameras capturing everything and would not hesitate to involve the police again. She gave one last angry shout and stomped back to her house. A few days later, I received a letter from the Homeowners Association Board accusing me of harassment and intimidation. I shook my head in disbelief that Karen was trying to play the victim when she was clearly in the wrong. I decided it was time to escalate matters and get this deranged woman out of our neighborhood for good. I consulted a lawyer who helped me file a restraining order against Karen. I submitted all the documentation showing her history of trespassing and harassment towards me. The judge reviewed the evidence and quickly approved a 2-year restraining order banning Karen from my property. Karen also received notification that due to her abusive conduct as Homeowners Association president, a trustee was being appointed to oversee the Homeowners Association. She was stripped of her authority and unable to continue terrorizing the neighborhood. Last I heard, Karen and her family moved away. Once it became clear she would face legal consequences if she didn't stop her harassment campaign against me. Our neighborhood has become peaceful again now that the tyrant Karen is gone. Justice was finally served. The next one is a pro-revenge story. When finishing up my degree in criminal justice, we had to learn about how the justice system works and how sometimes it doesn't. For about 2 weeks, we studied a case from the early 90s of a woman that had killed her husband. Because the case is public record and a very interesting read, look up Betty Freeberg, 1993. The setting was small-town Iowa, and the husband was the town drunk. Everyone in town knew him for a drunk, a brawler, a womanizer, and overall just a bad person. His wife was the stay-at-home mom, as she wasn't allowed to work or leave the house aside from get groceries. He would go home, beat her, and violate her sexuality, and the cycle would go on, and the whole town knew. Neighbors were a quarter-mile down the road, but still would call the police when they heard noises. It was well documented, and because he was never a threat to their daughter, the police did nothing aside from take him to jail like a revolving door. Each time he got out, he'd beat her up again. Their daughter was away at college, but came home for Thanksgiving. While the father was at work, the daughter told the mother that her father had violated her sexuality and that she had even had an abortion because of it. This was the breaking point for the mother. She got her revenge 100-fold. When daughter went back to school after the holidays and husband came home, she killed him with his gun at the kitchen table. The table is important because it was a big farm table used for chopping up deer and other livestock. Doing the butchering was her job, and she was good at it. If I could find the case report, it has pictures of the table and clear marks of chopping. She chopped up her husband and scattered his body over neighboring farms, fed what she could to her livestock, and cleaned up. Months went by, and winter came and left. Police investigating his disappearance even questioned her while sitting at the table drinking coffee. She explained the marks on the table by explaining that she butchered her own meat and showed the officers her deep freeze. The investigation went on for months until finally a neighbor's dog brought back a body part. They identified it as belonging to him, and she was arrested on the spot. She pled not guilty and refused any offers. It went to trial, and 12 of her peers judged her not guilt due to extenuating circumstances. She confessed to the crime, explained why she did it and how, and that she had no real choice because no one was going to help her. The farm was hers, and she refused to give it up as it had been her family's home. She was let go entirely for the murder charge. The next week, we had Betty as a speaker to the class to discuss the case, and she was awesome. At the time, she ironically sold dismemberment insurance for Aflac. Betty, if you ever read this, know you're seen as a figurehead for battered women, and you pulled off the best revenge I have ever been able to study. The next one is a petty revenge story. I'm mild-mannered, I'm quiet, I don't really go out of my way to speak at all. I enjoy observing, and it takes a lot to faze or irritate me. A lot. I'm also Muslim, and I wear a hijab, head covering like a nun, but not. I live in a small rural town in southern Ontario, and for the past 8 years I have loved it here. It's really nice, the townspeople are wonderful and inclusive, and it's just a beautiful little town, really. I have never really encountered rudeness, aside from my brief foray into the world of retail. I have also never been on the receiving end of any racial abuse. That is until the fateful day I went to my local grocer's to see that it was, in fact, closed early that day. Sighing, I resigned myself to the fact that I'd had to go to the next town over to get my bread and eggs. The next town over wasn't nearly as nice as my town. It was run down, unpleasant, and had a very long history of the KKK being active in there. But it's 2013, and no one had heard of any such horrible business for a good long while, right? And it'd be silly to not get bread and eggs based on things I wasn't even sure were true, right? So off I went. I walked into the grocer's and began perusing the fruits. The town, thus far, hadn't been at all what I had thought of it as. Sure, it was run down, but no one had given me any dirty looks. I was contented and went on my way. Until I heard, "Why is she here?" I didn't pay no mind until I heard again, "People like her should not be allowed in this country." My back stiffened. I was, quite plainly, the only minority around. I turned around and saw a wizened 50-year-old woman. Long of face and sour of expression, she looked at me with such hatred I was shocked. Her bony fingers pointed at me in an accusingly. My eyes widened, but I stood my ground and decided that perhaps she was just batty, and went on with my shopping calmly. Standing next to her was her husband, I presume. He was tall, large, and just as mean-faced as his wife. but he said nothing, and I was going to say nothing too. I'd let it go, too didn't want to get into a verbal altercation. I just wanted to get my things and go home. The old lady did not rest, however. She followed me around the shop and began spewing more hatred. Religion is evil, but Islam is the most evil. You are dirty, they should burn everything you touch. You're a pig. Islam is disgusting. Go back to your own country, you illiterate idiot. I bet you duck pigs. And on it went, each new epithet more horrifying than the last. They were only words, though. She hadn't touched me or assaulted me in any way. But I was starting to get annoyed. What had I done to her, anyway? I just existed, and she hated me based on my existence. I, for the life of me, don't understand how you can hate someone based purely on their physical appearance. The other customers and the cashiers were starting to stare now, but no one said anything. Fine, whatever. I don't really expect people to jump to my help. At all, and most of them were seniors anyway. I have by now finished paying. Her insults still ringing in my ears. I'm about to exit the store, and then I calmly turn around and face her for the first time. This whole time I had been silent. She had been going on about my illiteracy, about how I should go back to my own country, how disgusting I am, etc., etc. So I said in my clipped accent, I find it surprising that you know so much about me just based on my appearance. She gestured to my headscarf and spat. That thing tells me all I need to know. So I said, well, I thought you looked like a crack whore when I first saw you, but now I can see your face. I realize you're far too ugly to be one. She turned bright red in apoplectic rage and began screeching at other customers at this injustice I had caused her. Suddenly, a green-aproned man with a name tag that said manager appeared. She turned to him saying how horribly I had been her, how I'm a terrible person for calling her such foul things. He calmly allowed her tirade to abate and said, You're a sorry excuse for a human being, and you and your husband aren't allowed back here again. Please get out of my sight. He then turned me and apologized profusely for not being alerted sooner to the situation, and said I'm welcome back anytime. I thanked him and left. The old lady was spitting with rage, so as I drove off, I gave her a cheery wave. The next one is a malicious compliance story. A few years ago, I was working in downtown Los Angeles, but living in San Diego. For those of you who don't know, that's over 175-mile-per-day commute. I wasn't about to put my car through that, and so I took the train every morning to Union Station, then backtracked via subway to the job site. The cost of the Amtrak weekly pass was basically the same price of gas, but I thought I'd try to get that extra $3.50 per day from the subway covered, since I wasn't using the parking reimbursement in my contract. The $17.50 per week wasn't going to bankrupt me, but I figured I'd try. Came to the boss and asked, basically, since I'm not driving to work and getting reimbursed for parking at $10, could I submit my subway receipts at $3.50 and get that covered? And was told to pound sand. Now, the way the reimbursement worked was that you pulled a parking slip when you got to work and paid it at the end of the day. Then, on Mondays, you would submit all 5 parking slips from the previous week, and the $50 would be added to your paycheck, untaxed, obviously. So every day from then on, when I took the train into work, I just walked into the parking structure and pulled a ticket. I didn't have a vehicle, and so I didn't need to worry about paying for the ticket to leave, but the contractor didn't know that. They didn't have access to the system, which is why they didn't validate everyone's parking and skip the middleman. And as far as they knew, I was just driving in like everyone else. The next one is an entitled people story. To give some context here, I must say that I'm an IT engineer with toxic family relationships. I did cut off my father and my uncles and aunts, yet I keep in contact with my cousins and their children, which somehow I treat as mine, as I had none, and I'm an only child, therefore is the closest I got. I always prioritized success over relationships, so I'm single, and through the years I felt that my cousins' children weren't mine, therefore I wanted to raise one of my own. It took me some time, but finally, I adopted an 8-year-old kid, as those usually age out of foster care. I love the experience of raising a kid, yet I have had to deal with some entitledness from my cousins. It turns out that every now and then I usually spend some money traveling with my cousins and their children. Yet this year, for obvious reasons, I need to save money in order to get all of the stuff my son would need, and I'm planning on going big, the best of the best I could afford. I just explained this to my cousins and told them this year our trip together will be canceled. They said nothing, so I thought they understood the whole situation. Anyway, I wanted my kid to socialize with my cousin's children, so I invite them all to a get-together party after about 2 months when my son felt comfortable enough, and somehow all of the kids were so mad and refused to play with my kid. He just sit in a corner and tried to not cry, but he did. I just talked with the kids and they said he was not part of the family, and they deserve more, as he is adopted and they, as my family, were entitled to the trip to the parks in Florida. I was in shock and asked them where they got that from, and they told me how their parents have told them the reason why I took their trip was my son, who comes from the streets and isn't even family. I was fuming, so I told them all to leave. I had a Zoom meeting with just my cousins who tell me that their children must come first. And I told them they made me realize my son come first. So I canceled their college funds, their private school tuitions, and just told them that if my kid is not part of their family, neither am I, and they were cut off. I have been called unreasonable, but I think my son comes first, and I made the right decision. The next one is an entitled parent story. My mom, F50, and I, F25, have always had a strained relationship due to her, being a crazy she-bat. She's an aggressive narcissist, gaslighted, who has always favored my younger, drug-addicted, money-thieving brother for Lord knows what reason. Mom and I did actually have a period of my childhood where she said she would brag to her friends about me, that I get good grades and don't run off with boys getting pregnant and don't do drugs, etc. I realized a couple years ago that I don't really remember when she stopped saying those nice things about me. Did she ever? Maybe she was lying then too? Well, little did I know that not only had she stopped saying nice things about me, if she ever did, but she has been slagging me off to our family, my uncle, aunt, many cousins, and Nana, for years. I didn't find this out until 2 weeks ago. I got a phone call from my cousin who said she doesn't want to keep quiet about something anymore, and had to tell me that my mom was over at my aunt's, in front of the entire family, mocking me. She said I'm too sensitive, a lifetime of being put down by your mom will do that, hey? That I'm self-conscious of my body and that it's probably because I'm fat, and that she has to choose her words carefully around me because otherwise I might start a fight. Now, just days before this, I'd gone to a bridesmaid dress for her own wedding fitting at my mom's place, and the dress was massive on me. I'm very curvy, but the dress was even bigger. My mom, in half an hour, managed to insult my body, my skin, my body hair, and more. I have chronic depression, she knows this, and I spent the next week in a manic depressive spiral. She didn't give a crap, so to get that phone call from my cousin was the last straw. I posted a poem on my socials, which I had no intention of posting before, about how my mom tore me down during one dress fitting. She contacted me soon after and was saying everything was my fault anyway, and how could I post that poem? It's been 2 weeks now of no contact. I've been to 2 family events with her around and have actually been much calmer and happier without her hanging around, and I think she knows it. Yesterday at a carnival with the family, Mom was there again. I didn't say a word and enjoyed myself with my other family thoroughly. My cousin told me she'd overheard my mom saying she's waiting for me to come to her, but I have no intention of doing that anymore. Later, my uncle sat down with me and said my mom feels this is so weird and he doesn't want me to have any regrets, etc. And he can't imagine me not being at my mom's wedding. He says this after witnessing my mom making fun of me and calling me fat. Pretty much asking me to forgive and forget and move on. I don't know about you, but I've experienced more happiness and growth in the 2 weeks I've cut my mom off than I think I would by forgiving and forgetting crap she's done to me for the 100th time. I don't think I will forgive and move on like I always have before. I think I'll just move on, without her, with a smile on my face. Update. I was broken down and tried to find a way to communicate to my mom how I felt about what she had done. She insisted on doing this face-to-face at her home and told me to come alone. Now I may be a doormat, but I'm not a moron, so I told her I couldn't do that since my anxiety over the nature of the conversation would make me unable to properly communicate. But she wasn't happy with this, so we continued over text for a while, with me trying to convey my feelings and her calling me a liar and changing topic to things that had not even been mentioned before. I am stuck, between feeling like a liar and remembering that my mother lives to make me feel like I don't see things as they really are, that I'm a liar, that I am mean and nasty and a hypocrite. I have been spiraling for days. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.